What would you say is the primary problem, or maybe there are more than one with red meat? Is it the saturated fats in
Yeah,
it?
so it's a great question. Everybody tries to pin things on saturated fats, and there's a controversy now about saturated fats. Some people say they're not necessarily as bad as they're not. You don't want to demonize them. They play their role as well. I think that part of the issue about a heavy meat diet is really the overage of eating meat, and by the way, that meat is treated in factory farming also doesn't actually help the quality of the meat, the antibiotic laced foods, meats, the way they're treated. And because some animals are actually fattened up with steroids and other, artificial things, you're not really getting a pure food. You're getting a doctored food in a way that's not so good for you. We do know, by the way, that eating preserved meats, which I didn't put on my list, but not just red meat, but preserved meats, the deli meats, the things that we probably all grew up with, like as kids, you get a piece of bologna, you put it between two pieces of white bread and put some, artificial mayonnaise on. Like, I mean, everybody has had that experience, right? At least in this country, that kind of experience. And we know that artificial processed meats are actually rated by the World Health Organization as a carcinogen. And all the data shows that people who eat way a lot of processed meats. I'm not talking about the naturally processed meats, like the salamis and things hanging in the air in Italy or Sardinia. I'm talking about the mass produced stuff that you get at the grocery store. That's not good for you. And so I think that let's focus. This is what I tell people. Let's focus on the things that you love that are good for you.
Yeah,
Let's find ways to make them as tasty as possible.
I love that you qualified that, because I mean, honestly, when I read the statement from the World Health Organization, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it's the bologna that people are eating, in between the two slices of white bread with the mayo, with the soda, with the bag of Sun Chips on the side. It's like, it's the milieu.
Exactly.
It's not,
Exactly.
and I'm not saying that meat is good for you either, but it would be
Yeah,
impossible in
that
my view.
well, it's just like the lectin story, or
Yeah.
like it's so easy to try to find a culprit and then paint them as most wanted, and then send a vigilante team to go hunt them down. Like it's not that simple.
Yeah, I agree. If you are opting to, because you're absolutely right about the factory farm system, if you do incorporate meat into your diet, red meat specifically, what do you look out for?
I try to get uh, what I call kind of conscientiously raised meats.
Hmm.
I care about the planet and I care about animals, and so I think that if you're going to go for meat, get meat that's done properly, raised properly.
Right.
And and just a little side comment that I usually I don't try to tell people what not to do. I try to encourage people what to do that they enjoy.
Right.
But I will tell you, I scratched my head a little bit about these plant-based burgers that are genetically engineered and they're ultra processed a lot of times. And it's like, look, man, if you really love a burger, and you got to eat a burger, and that's what you really love, take good care of your body, eat really good stuff that supports your health defense systems most of the time. And then if you're going to eat a burger, get the best friggin' burger you can find with the best quality of meat and just go for it. Knock yourself out. Just don't do it all the time.
I love that. You talk about foods that can help us regenerate our tissues, our organs, with the help of stem cells that we produce endogenously. What are some of those regenerative foods?
Yeah. So, first of all, just so that everyone knows how we know that our bodies regenerate, we have stem cells that actually live in our bone marrow. They're kind of like bees living inside a hive. And when our organs or tissues need to be repaired or regenerated, they send a signal to our bone marrow. The bone marrow is kind of like the brown stuff. If you break a chicken bone and you can see in the middle of it, that's all. That's all. Those are all stem cells. We actually were made from stem cells in the womb. The leftovers are just packed into our bone marrow and a few other places. And when there's a signal that your organ needs to be repaired, basically the damaged area sends a text message to your bone marrow and says, "Hey, I need a few stem cells. Come on." And what happens is that message will send out the stem cells into your bloodstream and your genesis like bees coming out of a hive. and those bees they make a beeline literally right for that organ and replace it. It's pretty amazing. If I, a lot of people don't know this, but if you had your liver, some of our organs really regenerate. If you had a liver problem and I removed 2/3 of your liver, most of it, the rest of it, a third, will grow right back, the rest of it right back. If I clipped off the top of your lung, it would just regenerate, grow right back. And like, people go, whoa, I didn't know that. But guess what? Our hair grows back. Our skin grows back. You get a little dandruff on, it's because their skin's falling off, the old stuff being replaced by stem cells. So what are the foods that can actually help augment, boost, activate, amplify this process? Well, there's a whole bunch of them. One of my favorite ones is to talk about is dark chocolate, cacao, which is a fruit pod, actually, and dried and usually fermented. Cacao has all these polyphenols, and some of the cacao polyphenols, which are called proanthocyanidins, actually have been shown when they're given in dark chocolate, like really dark, high flavanol cocoa. Okay. Specifically, the study was done with hot chocolate made with ultra dark chocolate, high flavanol cacao. You give it, there was a study in people who are older, 60s, with heart disease. Okay. They had bad circulation, bad hearts. And they gave them just 2 cups of hot cocoa to have a day for 30 days. At baseline, they measure their stem cells in the bloodstream. So we can actually withdraw a blood, like you go to a doctor's office, and we can count the stem cells in your bloodstream under a microscope. Okay, so we know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We know exactly what you started out with baseline. Everyone with heart disease starts out with fewer stem cells. That's probably why in part why you have the heart disease. You're not repairing yourself fast enough. 30 days of having 2 cups a day of hot cocoa with high flavanols, like dark chocolate, it doubled the number of stem cells in your bloodstream. And when you actually measure the blood flow using a blood pressure cuff and an ultrasound, it doubled the improvement. It basically improved your blood flow as well. So again, powerful stuff, and nailed right down to the stem cells. Barley can also do it. And there's also even a substance in fruit peel called ursolic acid. Ursolic acid is found in the peel of apples and peaches and cranberries. And it's really hard to eat, or apricots, really hard to eat a lot of fruit skin, like doesn't sound that appetizing. But if you get dried fruit, I don't know if I would regularly eat 6 whole apricots, but I could easily eat 6 dried apricots a day. Okay. So lots of easy ways of actually getting fruit peel or ursolic acid. That also helps to regenerate your organs.
Is it not true that some of the most polyphenol rich foods in the supermarket we know that they're, of course, produce, but that they're bitter. They tend to be bitter or sour. Herbs, spices, dark chocolate, coffee, tea, wine, really sort of, because these compounds, correct me if I'm wrong, they're generated as plant defense compounds, which are not toxic to us in the doses that they appear in our diets, but their tastes generally are meant to ward off smaller organisms.
Yeah, the plants, Mother Nature put these bioactive chemicals, okay, which is what all these things are, carotenoids and polyphenols. Mother Nature kind of put them into the plant to protect the plant. The plant protects itself, and it's a little bitter, or a little sour, or a little, floral, or whatever it is, because insects don't like that scent, right? So it's actually like a natural insecticide. And so when humans started to eat plant-based foods, those natural plant defenses suddenly had a new job description. Mm-hmm. They had to interact with our human cells. And I think that's where over evolution, over tens of thousands of years, we intuitively started to figure out which foods are actually better for us. And so we are not the only generation that has talked about how good plant-based foods are. I mean, this goes back, probably back to the troglodytes. They understood how important it was to eat, fiber-rich plant-based foods. I think we're rediscovering at a much deeper level and understanding with science why it's so important.
So, do people who advocate for the carnivore diet just make you cringe? Like, what's your take on that?
No, you know what? Listen, I have a, I take the long view towards things. First of all, I regard food as something that's very intimate. It's one of the most intimate parts of our lives. Why? Because when you think about food, everyone has some association with the smells and the tastes of what they in the house you grew up in, what your mom cooked, right? Your relatives, your holidays, and it tells us something about our communities and our culture. And in this country, we all came from someplace, and so there's everybody has their own unique influences. And I think that's wonderful because in every culture that you can get food in, there are elements, there are ingredients that are actually been shown to be plant-based, healthy. Sometimes it's seafood-based and not just fish, but even shellfish. You can pick your way through more than 200 different ingredients that are good for you. Look, most people before the middle of the last century, before the middle of the 20th century, were not eating a lot of meat. They didn't have the money. The meat wasn't scaled up to the factory farming. It wasn't that easy to get access. Transportation wasn't that great. And so people were naturally had more abundance of plant-based foods and seafood if you live near the shore. And it was much harder to get meat. And if you go to other countries, like certain places in Asia or certain places in Latin America and many places in Europe, the natural agrarian tendencies of communities is easier to grow and easier to get plants. And I think what's happened is that we've lost this connection with our planet, frankly. And so, you just wheel your thing into the meat section of the grocery store. You can start, like just putting packages, shrink wrap plastic packages into your grocery and freeze it. That's not how we used to live. And so I think what we're just kind of getting back to common sense is, okay, like some people think meat tastes really good. Some people really crave it. But honestly, the body of evidence, science evidence, but also kind of the tradition of humanity. We usually ate mostly plant-based foods, and for people along the shore, adding a lot of seafood, that's all better for you. Let's get back to basics. And I think that's what we need to do is strip ourselves down a little bit away from the industrialization and think about our own bodies.
Yeah, I love that. I love plants and I love not plants. I love both. So I'm definitely right there with you. You mentioned the microbiome briefly, which we haven't really talked about in quite some time on the podcast. Do you want to, for listeners that are maybe unfamiliar with the concept of the microbiome, the gut microbiome specifically, go into that a little bit, and then I guess let's talk about how to nurture that aspect of our health.
Yeah, such an important topic because our microbiome, our gut bacteria, which I'll explain in a second, really helps to influence, lowers inflammation in our body, helps to boost our healthy, protective immune system, and also powerfully influences our metabolism, how well we use glucose in our body and our insulin sensitivity, and also amazingly triggers signals through one of the big nerves in our body, the vagus nerve, into our brain and influences neurotransmitters, which actually influences our mood. So here's the microbiome. Microbiome is our gut bacteria. And when I went to medical school many years ago, we were frankly taught that bacteria are bad, kill bacteria, must kill bacteria, right? And that's where everybody learns how to bust out their prescription bed and write antibiotics. Well, it turns out that our gut has most of the bacteria in our body, and most of our gut bacteria is healthy bacteria, good bacteria. In fact, we've got about 40 trillion cells, human cells in our body. The cells that make up our heart and our brain, our lungs and our face and everything else. We've got 39 trillion bacteria. Okay. Wow. So almost a 1-to-1. We're about half bacteria and half human. There's even a term, Max, for this, for an organism that's composed of multiple organisms. An ecosystem that's composed of multiple organisms is called a holobiont, HOLOBIONT. Doesn't sound as cool as being a cyborg, which is part machine and part human, but part bacteria and part other organism, part human. We're holobionts. We're not even fully human anymore, right? So if our gut bacteria protect us, okay, and there's lots of different kinds. Recently, there's been some discoveries that there are tens of thousands of new viruses discovered in our gut that are not dangerous viruses like the one that causes COVID, or HIV, but healthy viruses that actually keep bad bacteria from overgrowing. So, we don't even want to get rid of all the viruses. We coexist with all these really important organisms in our body. And we've got to, and what are these, by the way, in health, what do they do? When we feed our gut bacteria, when we feed ourselves, our human cells absorb the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, all the things that we need. And then again, when I was in medical school, we were taught, like fibrous foods, our body doesn't absorb them. It just passes it down to the colon. And because they kind of irritate the colon, it keeps you moving regularly. You go regularly, so to speak. The whole prune juice thing. It turns out that's not quite true. After we get fed first, okay, that leftover stuff that our human cells don't absorb goes to feed the bacteria. And so every meal we have, we're feeding our human cells and our bacterial cells. And again, very important, when we feed our bacteria good things, they thrive. And when they thrive, what do? They actually produce metabolites, their own metabolites. They're called short chain fatty acids, or SCAFAs. There's a lot of science to this, but the most important thing is that when we feed our gut bacteria well, they have their own metabolism. And what they kick out as part of their metabolism are these little fatty acids that are healthy. What do the healthy fatty acids do? They're released from the gut. They go into our bloodstream. They lower body inflammation. They help our own muscles and cells use glucose more effectively. They effectively help to prevent diabetes. They maintain our blood pressure. And again, they speed up wound healing. They even keep our hair and our skin in good, healthy shape. And they can stimulate neurotransmitters like GABA, serotonin, oxytocin. Oxytocin, by the way, is a social hormone. When you've been isolated in quarantine and finally get to see your friends and family again, you just have this rush. That rush is your brain producing oxytocin. It's the same hormone. By the way, when you get a good kiss, your brain releases oxytocin. When you see somebody you love, same thing. The brain also has this massive surge of oxytocin during orgasm. Okay, that's how important this is. Our gut bacteria helps to control that. So when we do good by our gut bacteria, they do good by us, and they help us relieve our stress as well. So dysbiosis, which is a problem with our gut bacteria, undoes all those things, raises inflammation, which is the opposite, lowers our protective immunity, which is not what we want, mucks around and screws up our metabolism. So our glucose goes up, heading towards that diabetic state. Our healing, our ability to heal wounds goes down. Our skin doesn't look good. Our hair doesn't look good. And our brain neurotransmitters aren't functioning. And that's why dysbiosis, problems with the microbiome that can be easily fixed with food, okay, are associated with depression, schizophrenia, and even autism. Hi there. If you enjoyed watching this video, I know you'll love the next one. Stay here and check it out. And I'll see you there.